Imagine this. A man, a war hero, walks into a bar. The kind of place where people go to relax, to unwind, and to forget about the stresses of the world. He's dressed in a t-shirt and jeans, a casual look, but his eyes tell a different story. They've seen things that most of us can't even begin to imagine. He walks with a certain kind of quiet confidence, a kind that comes from years of serving his country, of risking his life to protect the freedoms we all hold dear. But when he reaches the counter, something unexpected happens. The bartender looks him up and down, his expression unchanging. Before he does the unthinkable, he denies this veteran service. The man stands there, stunned, his mind racing to understand why. But what happens next is even more shocking. The crowd that's been quietly watching from the sidelines suddenly erupts, and what starts as an uncomfortable moment transforms into something much bigger. The reaction of the crowd is something no one saw coming, and it will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about respect, dignity, and what it truly means to be a hero in this day and age. Now, you're probably wondering, why would anyone deny a veteran service? What could possibly justify such an act? And how did the crowd react? The answers aren't as simple as they may seem, and you're about to discover how a single moment can reveal so much about the world we live in today. You've probably seen viral videos where people's reactions leave you speechless, but trust me, what you're about to see takes that to a whole new level. And let me tell you this, if you think you have it figured out right now, you're wrong. This story will twist and turn in ways that will keep you glued to your screen, wanting to know what happens next. You're about to witness the kind of situation that doesn't just challenge the idea of respect for those who have served, but also forces you to think about your own role in society. What would you do if you were in that bar? Would you stand up for the veteran, or would you stay silent, hoping someone else would take action? The choices people make when confronted with a situation like this speak volumes about who they really are, and the crowd's reaction will leave you wondering if we, as a society, are truly living up to the values we claim to hold so dear. This isn't just a story about one man being denied at a bar. It's a reflection of something much bigger, a snapshot of the times we're living in and the choices we're all being forced to make in moments of truth. But I don't want to give too much away just yet. There's more to this than meets the eye. I know you're probably sitting there thinking, okay, what happened next? And believe me, you're going to want to see it. But I need you to stay with me for just a little bit longer because what I'm about to reveal is something that will not only answer that question, but will also leave you questioning how far we've come as a society and what we can do to make things right. This story isn't just about a veteran being denied a drink. It's about the power of human reaction, the impact of standing up for what's right, and the consequences of remaining silent when something wrong happens right in front of you. It's about the values we hold dear and how those values are tested in everyday moments. And trust me, by the end of this video, you'll have a newfound perspective on respect, gratitude, and the role we all play in shaping the world around us. So, stick around. You're not going to want to miss the moment the crowd takes action. It's a turning point, and it's coming up fast. But before we dive into that moment, let's take a look at the situation that set the stage for this unforgettable event. What happens when someone who has given everything for this country finds themselves in a position where they have to prove they deserve the most basic form of respect? You'll have to wait just a bit longer to find out, but I promise it's worth it. This is one story you won't forget. Stay tuned, because the next part is where everything changes. As the camera pans across the bar, the man stands there, still trying to process what just happened. The noise of the crowd, the clinking of glasses, the murmur of conversations, all of it seems to fade into the background for a moment. His name is David Turner, a 47-year-old veteran who spent nearly 2 decades serving in the U.S. Army. He's been to places most people would rather not think about, and he's done things that will stay with him for the rest of his life. But despite the weight of those memories, David had always been the type to keep things close to the chest. A man of few words, he kept to himself, choosing to quietly navigate through life after his service ended. His friends knew him as a solid guy, someone who didn't get caught up in drama, who didn't ask for much, and certainly didn't make waves. In fact, he was the kind of person who preferred to blend into the background, letting others take the spotlight. But that all changed in the weeks leading up to the night at the bar. David had been going through a tough time lately. After leaving the army, he struggled to find a sense of purpose. It's a challenge many veterans face, but David's situation seemed more complicated. His marriage had fallen apart a few years back, the strain of years spent apart during deployments weighing heavily on both him and his wife. Their 2 children, teenagers now, lived with their mother, and David saw them only on weekends. The loneliness, the isolation, the feeling of being lost in a world that had moved on without him. It all piled up day after day until it began to take its toll on his mental health. He'd always been proud of his service, but that pride felt hollow when he found himself sitting in an empty apartment on a Friday night, surrounded by the echoes of a life that no longer existed. That's when he decided to start frequenting the local bar. It was a small, unassuming place tucked away on a quiet street, a bar where the regulars knew each other's names and where the drinks were cold. For a while, it seemed like a decent way to take the edge off, to drown out the noise in his head. It wasn't a glamorous spot, but it was enough to make him feel somewhat connected to the world around him. The bartender, a man named Charlie, had always been friendly enough, but David's visits were never particularly remarkable. He'd sit at the bar, nursing a beer, watching sports on the television, and occasionally exchanging a few words with the other patrons. No one ever really got too close to him, and that was fine by him. But in recent weeks, something had changed. David noticed it in the way people looked at him. A subtle shift in their behavior, a kind of hesitation when they spoke to him. It wasn't overt, but it was there, like a shadow that followed him wherever he went. The other regulars had started whispering about him, murmuring behind his back when he wasn't looking. He didn't know exactly what they were saying, but he could feel it. It wasn't just his imagination. Something was off. And it wasn't just the patrons either. Charlie, the bartender, seemed different too. At first, he was always chatty, always joking around, but recently he had become more distant, almost cold. It was the kind of behavior that might seem insignificant at first, but in hindsight, David realized it was a sign that something was wrong. And then, the night he walked into the bar, it all came to a head. The denial at the counter wasn't the first time David had felt like an outsider, but this time, it was more than just an uncomfortable glance or a fleeting moment of judgment. There was something deliberate about it, as if Charlie had made up his mind long before David even stepped foot inside.
But why?
Why deny a man who had served his country? What was going on behind the scenes that led to this moment? Could it be that Charlie had some sort of personal issue with David? Or was it something deeper, something more systemic that was playing out in the background? As David stood there, struggling to process the situation, a group of men at the far end of the bar suddenly caught his eye. They were loud, boisterous, a little too rowdy for a place like this. One of them, a guy named Derek, was a regular at the bar, though not someone David had ever really spoken to. Derek was the type who seemed to thrive on conflict, always ready to pick a fight or make trouble for no real reason. It was no secret that he and David had never gotten along. Something about David's quiet demeanor always rubbed Derek the wrong way. But lately, Derek had been acting more aggressively, making snide remarks when David walked by, laughing a little too loudly when he made his way to the bathroom, as if he was trying to provoke a reaction. Was it possible that Derek had something to do with what had just happened? Could he have said something to Charlie, influencing his decision to deny David service? Then there was the matter of the woman sitting next to David, a woman he had noticed several times in the past few weeks. Her name was Jessica, and she had a reputation for being a little too quick to judge. She was a regular at the bar, someone who liked to talk a lot but didn't really know anyone on a personal level. There were whispers that Jessica had a thing for Charlie, and some people wondered if there might be some tension between the two of them. Could her presence have played a role in what had just transpired? Was there something about her that had made David an easy target? The more he thought about it, the more questions started to pile up. Was he being set up? Or was this just a case of bad luck, a series of random events coming together in a way that no one could have predicted? The more David tried to make sense of it all, the more the situation slipped through his fingers, leaving him grasping at straws. What was the real reason behind his denial? And why did it feel like the entire bar was complicit in some sort of unspoken agreement? With each passing second, the tension in the air grew heavier. Every person in the room seemed to be watching him, waiting for something to happen, as if they knew that this moment would mark a turning point. The truth was, David didn't know who to trust anymore. His thoughts were scattered, and the questions piled on faster than he could process them. And just when he thought he might have figured it out, something happened that changed everything. A voice from behind him broke the silence. It was Charlie, but it wasn't the same Charlie David had known. This time, his tone was different, colder, sharper. "You should leave," Charlie said, his voice low, but filled with a hidden threat.
Now.
David's heart raced. What was going on here? What had he walked into? And why did it feel like he was just the pawn in a much larger game? The pieces were all in place, but nothing made sense yet. What had just started as a simple denial of service had turned into something much darker, and the truth was slipping further away with each passing moment. David turned slowly, his mind racing as Charlie's words hit him like a ton of bricks. "You should leave.
Now."
There was a coldness in Charlie's voice that sent a chill down David's spine. He couldn't understand it. This was the same guy who had poured him drinks countless times, who had shared casual conversation about everything and nothing. But now, Charlie's eyes were hard, filled with something David couldn't quite place. Fear? Anger? Or maybe something more sinister. David opened his mouth, but no words came out. He was caught off guard. The bar was quieter now, like everyone was holding their breath, waiting for the next move. He looked around, trying to catch a glimpse of something, anything, that would explain what was happening. But all he saw were faces, blank, unreadable. Was it possible that everyone in the bar had been in on something he didn't know? He hadn't felt this out of place in a long time. The questions that had been swirling in his head only seemed to multiply, each one more confusing than the last. What had happened to the friendly, easygoing bar he had come to? And why had Charlie turned on him like this? David's eyes darted to Derek, who was watching the exchange with a knowing smirk. It wasn't a surprise. Derek had always been the troublemaker. But something about his expression now made David's blood run cold. There was something almost triumphant in Derek's gaze, like he had won something. David's gut twisted, but before he could react, a sudden voice from the other side of the room called out, interrupting the tension. It was Jessica, the woman who had been sitting next to him for the last few weeks. "You should listen to Charlie," she said, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. "You don't belong here." David's eyes widened. This wasn't the Jessica he had seen 100 times before. This was a woman who had always kept her distance, never offering anything more than a friendly nod or a passing comment. Yet now, she was speaking with an authority that made his stomach churn. Was this all a setup? Was she involved too? The pit in his stomach deepened as he realized that he had no idea who to trust anymore. He turned back to Charlie, his voice shaky but firm. "What's going on here? What's this about?" Charlie took a deep breath, glancing around the room before leaning in close, his face inches from David's. "I'm telling you this for your own good," Charlie muttered, his voice low and urgent. "You're in way over your head. Just drop it, okay? Walk away, and it'll be over." David's heart skipped a beat. "Drop what?" he demanded, barely able to keep his voice steady. But Charlie just stepped back, his face hardening once again, and shook his head. Then, out of nowhere, Derek stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor as he made his way over to the bar. "You heard the man," Derek said, his voice mocking. "Just leave." He clapped a hand on David's shoulder, but the touch felt like a warning, like a reminder that David didn't belong here anymore. David shook him off, refusing to let this bully intimidate him. But the tension in the room was suffocating now, and it was clear that whatever was going on, David was no longer just a bystander. He was part of it now, whether he liked it or not. He needed answers. And he wasn't going to leave without them. David made a decision in that moment. He wasn't going to walk away. He couldn't. Not when he had no idea what was really happening, not when it felt like something was being hidden from him, something. He glanced around the bar, trying to read the faces of the people who had been here the longest, trying to find someone, anyone who might have the answers he was looking for. But as he looked closer, he realized something that made his blood run cold. The faces he thought he knew so well, the regulars, were acting different. They were pretending, hiding behind a mask of casual indifference. And in that moment, David saw something else, a man in the corner, standing almost too still. His eyes were locked on David, but when their gazes met, the man quickly looked away, his face pale, his hands trembling slightly. Important. David's mind raced. Who was that? And why had that man reacted like that? The more David thought about it, the more unsettling it became. There was something about the whole scene that didn't add up, like a puzzle where all the pieces were wrong. He needed to talk to that man to get to the bottom of whatever was going on here. But just as he started to approach, a figure stepped into his path. It was Jessica, again. "Don't," she said, her tone now far less friendly, more insistent. "You're going to get yourself hurt. Some things are better left alone." David stopped in his tracks, the weight of her warning sinking in. This wasn't just about a bar fight. This wasn't even about disrespecting a veteran. Something much deeper was at play here, something that David wasn't privy to yet. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was a secret, a hidden truth that everyone around him knew, but no one would share. Why were they all so eager to push him out? What was the real reason behind this hostility? David's mind was spinning as he looked around, trying to find that man in the corner again, but he was gone. Had he left? Or had someone warned him? And why had Jessica, of all people, stopped him from talking to him? There was a creeping suspicion in David's mind that someone was pulling the strings, orchestrating everything from the shadows. But who? And why? His instincts told him to leave, to walk away and forget about it all, but the thought of the man who had disappeared and the coldness in Jessica's eyes made him hesitate. Something didn't sit right. The pieces were starting to move into place, but David still couldn't see the full picture. He needed to keep digging, but with every step, the walls seemed to close in tighter. And just as he turned to head back toward the door, something strange happened. The lights in the bar flickered, a momentary, almost imperceptible glitch. But it was enough to make David stop dead in his tracks. When the lights came back on, the man in the corner was standing right in front of him. His eyes were wide, and his lips barely moved as he whispered, "Don't trust Charlie. He's not who you think he is." And then, just as quickly as he had appeared, the man was gone. David's mind was racing. The man in the corner had vanished so quickly, it was like he had melted into the shadows. For a moment, he stood frozen in the middle of the bar, the weight of the whisper still echoing in his ears. "Don't trust Charlie. He's not who you think he is." The words felt like a jolt of electricity, pulling him further down a rabbit hole he didn't fully understand. Who was this man, and why had he warned David? What did it all mean? Just as he started to move toward the exit, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, half expecting it to be a random message, something to distract him. But when he saw the name on the screen, his heart skipped a beat. It was his daughter, Rachel, calling. She hadn't called in weeks, and the sudden appearance of her name on his phone was enough to set off a wave of unease. David answered the call, his throat tightening as he pressed the phone to his ear. "Dad, I need to talk to you." Rachel's voice came through, strained and shaky. "I don't know who else to turn to. Something weird is going on. Please don't ignore this." Her words were rushed, barely coherent, and it sounded like she had been crying. David's heart dropped. He'd never heard his daughter like this before, and he immediately felt the shift in the air, like something was about to break wide open. "Rachel, slow down," David said, his voice a mixture of concern and confusion. "What's going on? What happened?" There was a long pause before Rachel's voice cracked. "It's Mom. She's been acting strange lately. I don't know how to explain it, but I think she's hiding something. I overheard her talking to someone on the phone, and they were saying things about you, Dad." Her voice trembled with the weight of whatever she had just discovered, and David felt his stomach churn. What could his ex-wife possibly be involved in? The last few years had been tense, but he never imagined she would be mixed up in something like this. Rachel continued, her voice barely audible. "I'm scared, Dad. She's not acting like herself. And I think someone's watching us. I don't know who they are, but I saw a car parked across the street from our house last night. It's been there for hours. Please, can you come over? David's mind was racing now. The connection between what was happening at the bar and Rachel's sudden call hit him like a ton of bricks. He couldn't ignore it. There was something bigger at play here, something more than just a random bar fight or a simple misunderstanding. This had to be connected to whatever was going on behind the scenes at the bar, and now, Rachel's involvement in this mess made everything even more complicated. David promised Rachel that he would be there soon, but as he hung up the phone, he felt an overwhelming sense of dread settle over him. What did she overhear? What was his ex-wife hiding? And why was someone watching them? As he stepped out of the bar, the questions multiplied, each one darker than the last. He knew he had to act quickly, but every time he thought he was getting closer to the truth, it felt like the ground beneath him shifted, making it harder to see clearly. As he walked to his car, his mind kept going back to the strange warning he had received at the bar. Don't trust Charlie. Who was Charlie really? What was his connection to all of this? David had always assumed the bartender was just a regular guy, someone who ran a local dive and served drinks. But now, everything was in question. Charlie wasn't just a bartender. He was a part of something much bigger.
But what?
And who else was involved? When David arrived at his ex-wife's house, the first thing he noticed was the car across the street. It wasn't there when he dropped Rachel off earlier that week. The car was old, beat up, the kind of vehicle that didn't quite belong in this neighborhood. The driver's side window was cracked slightly, and a shadowy figure sat behind the wheel. It looked like they were waiting, watching. But for what?
And why?
David's pulse quickened as he approached the door, but before he could knock, it swung open. His ex-wife, Maria, stood there, her eyes wide and wary. Her face was pale, the lines of exhaustion drawn deep under her eyes. David, you shouldn't be here, she said, her voice strained and nervous. Please, just leave it alone. David's heart raced. Maria, what's going on? Rachel called me. She's scared. What aren't you telling me? Maria hesitated for a long moment, her gaze flickering to the street before she spoke again, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't want to drag you into this, but it's too late now. There's more going on than you know, and you need to stay out of it. For your own safety, David, you need to stop asking questions. The words hit him like a punch. This wasn't just a family matter anymore. Whatever was happening had now pulled his ex-wife into the web, and she wasn't the only one hiding something. He could feel it in the air, thick with tension and fear. But what was it that they were all trying to protect him from? What had they gotten themselves involved in that was so dangerous? And why did everyone, from Charlie at the bar to his own ex-wife, seem so eager to push him away from the truth? David didn't know how much longer he could keep his composure. The stakes were higher than ever now. It wasn't just about finding out what was going on at the bar anymore. It was about uncovering a hidden world of secrets, a world that someone or something was trying to keep buried. And now, with Rachel caught in the middle, David had no choice but to push forward, even as the threats, both subtle and direct, began to escalate. As he stepped into the house and closed the door behind him, his eyes caught sight of something on the kitchen counter. It was a small envelope, addressed to him in a handwriting he didn't recognize. His pulse raced as he reached for it, tearing it open with shaky hands. Inside was a single, cryptic line. The truth is buried deeper than you think. David's breath caught in his throat. Who had sent this? And what did it mean? The answers were still out of reach, but one thing was clear. The deeper he dug, the more dangerous it would become. David couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. It had started as a flicker of doubt, a passing thought, but now it was growing into something he couldn't ignore. The envelope, the cryptic message inside, Maria's warning, everything seemed to be leading him down a path he wasn't ready to walk. And yet, he couldn't stop himself from taking that next step, even though every instinct in him screamed that he should turn back. He was in too deep now, and the silence between him and the truth had become suffocating. He had to find out what was really going on, even if it meant confronting things he wasn't prepared for. But what happened next, something so drastic, so terrifying, made him realize just how far the rabbit hole went. Rachel had begged him to come over, her voice trembling on the phone, and David knew something was wrong. It wasn't just her fear. It was the urgency in her tone that told him this wasn't a normal call. He had tried to push the feeling aside, tried to tell himself that everything was fine, that his daughter was just scared of a strange car parked outside. But as he turned onto her street that evening, the sight that greeted him sent a jolt of panic through his chest. The car was still there, parked on the same spot, the same worn-out vehicle that had been watching them for days. But this time, something was different. The driver's side door was wide open, and the figure that had been sitting there was now gone. David's heart raced as he parked in front of Rachel's house. He didn't even bother to turn off the engine. His eyes scanned the area, searching for any signs of movement. But everything seemed eerily still. The streetlights cast long shadows across the pavement, and the faint rustling of leaves in the wind only made the silence more oppressive. His breath caught in his throat as he stepped out of the car, every step feeling heavier than the last. Something was wrong, and it wasn't just the car. It was the feeling that something or someone was closing in. As he approached Rachel's front door, his thoughts began to spiral. He couldn't shake the sense that he was being followed, that someone was just out of sight, watching his every move. He had been too preoccupied with the mystery of the bar, with his strange interactions, the cryptic warnings, to fully grasp the danger he was in. But now, the pieces were starting to fall into place, and with each passing second, the pressure of the unknown grew heavier. He didn't want to admit it, but he knew it now. He was in serious danger. Whoever had been pulling the strings all along wasn't just trying to hide something from him. They were trying to erase him. David knocked on the door, trying to push down the rising panic in his chest. He could feel the sweat starting to bead on his forehead, and his hands were shaking. Rachel was supposed to be inside, but when the door swung open, it wasn't her standing there. It was Maria. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with something that resembled fear, but there was no sign of Rachel. "Where is she?" David demanded, his voice shaking with a mix of anger and desperation. Maria didn't answer right away. She just stood there, frozen. Then, finally, she stepped aside, her voice barely audible as she spoke. "She's gone." David's blood ran cold. "What do you mean, gone? Where is she?" Maria's eyes darted nervously around, as if she was afraid someone might be listening. "She's not here, David. I think she left. I think she went to find answers. I tried to stop her, but..." Her voice trailed off, and for the first time, David saw a crack in her composure, a flicker of vulnerability. "She was scared, too. I didn't know what to do. But now, I think it's worse than we thought." David could barely process her words. "What do you mean?"
What are you talking about?
His chest tightened, the sense of dread building within him. He had seen the way Rachel had looked on the phone, terrified, lost. And now she was gone, just like that. Gone without a trace. Maria's hands trembled as she reached for the doorframe, clutching it for support. "Someone took her, David. Someone's been watching us, waiting for the right moment. And I think Rachel's gotten too close to the truth." David's heart pounded in his ears.
No.
"No, this isn't happening. I'm going to find her. I swear to God, I'm going to find her." But as he turned to leave, something caught his eye. A piece of paper, tucked under the doormat, fluttered slightly in the breeze. He bent down, picking it up carefully, and his fingers trembled as he unfolded it. It was another message. "She knows too much. You're next." The words were stark, final. And in that moment, David felt the cold grip of fear tighten around him. He wasn't just dealing with an isolated incident anymore. This was something far bigger, far more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. The realization hit him with a sickening thud. This wasn't a random threat. It wasn't a coincidence. Whoever had taken Rachel wasn't just trying to intimidate him. They were sending a message. David's pulse raced as he stood there in the doorway, the world around him suddenly feeling like it was closing in. His thoughts whirled.
The bar.
Charlie. The cryptic warning. Maria's fear. Rachel's disappearance. It all connected in a way that made his skin crawl. He had been too focused on piecing together the mystery, too sure that he could handle whatever came his way. But now, As the weight of the situation hit him, he realized just how wrong he had been. He wasn't in control. And someone with far more power and influence than he could ever understand, was calling the shots. David turned to Maria, his voice low but filled with a terrifying urgency. "We need to find her.
Now.
And we need to be careful. Whoever did this won't stop until they get what they want." But Maria just shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "It's already too late, David. They're already here. They've been watching us for days." David's chest tightened. The fear in Maria's voice mirrored his own, and for the first time, he felt the weight of the situation settle fully upon him. This was no longer just a mystery to solve. It was a fight for survival. Whoever was behind all of this was playing a game, and he was now a pawn in their twisted scheme. And if he didn't act fast, if he didn't find Rachel soon, he might lose everything. The terror was real now, the stakes higher than ever. And just as David turned to leave, he felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Something or someone was watching him again. He looked over his shoulder, half expecting to see a shadow move, but there was nothing. Just the empty street, the stillness pressing down on him, the calm before the storm. But deep down, he knew that the storm was already here. As David stood there, frozen in the doorway of Rachel's house, his mind raced. Every step he had taken so far, every piece of evidence, had pointed toward one conclusion: that someone was out to silence him, to stop him from uncovering the truth. He had assumed that Rachel was just another victim, caught in the crossfire of a web far too complex for him to untangle alone. But the weight of the situation felt different now. There was something in the air, a strange shift that he couldn't place, something gnawing at the edge of his thoughts. As he stepped into the dimly lit house, the air felt thick, heavy with the scent of stale coffee, and something else. Fear. His eyes scanned the room, and that's when he noticed it. On the counter, under a stack of unopened mail, was a small, worn-out journal. It was Rachel's. He knew that because of the way it was bound, the leather cover, the fraying edges. She had always kept it hidden, never letting anyone see it. She said it was her way of sorting through her thoughts when life got too overwhelming. But now, seeing it there in plain view, it felt like a sign. Something he had missed. Something important. Without thinking, he grabbed it, flipping it open. The first page was filled with scribbled notes, thoughts that didn't make sense at first glance, disconnected fragments of conversations, names, dates. It wasn't a diary in the way he thought. It was a map of something darker. The deeper he read, the more it became clear that Rachel had known more than she'd let on. She had been keeping track of everything, the strange occurrences, the shadowy figures she had noticed watching their house, the odd phone calls that came in the dead of night. But then, just as he was about to close the journal, he stumbled upon something that sent chills down his spine. There, written in a hurried, almost frantic script, were the words, "It was never about the bar. It's always been about you." David's heart stopped. What did she mean? How could she have known? His thoughts were cut short by the sharp sound of footsteps approaching from the hallway. He spun around, his pulse quickening. Maria was standing there, her face pale, her eyes wide with something he couldn't quite place. "What did you find?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. David's mind raced as he clutched the journal in his hand, suddenly feeling the weight of everything, the uncertainty, the fear, the constant feeling of being watched. The clues, the messages, they had all led him to one conclusion. Someone was trying to destroy him, to take everything from him. But now, after reading those words, the reality of the situation hit him like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just about protecting Rachel. This wasn't just about finding the truth. This was about a much larger, more dangerous game, one in which he was the unwitting pawn. He looked at Maria, trying to piece together the fragments of what was happening, but the look in her eyes made him hesitate. There was something different about her now. Something off. He had trusted her, relied on her to help him. But as he studied her face, he saw the faintest flicker of doubt, something that didn't belong. "David, I need to tell you something," Maria said, her voice tight with emotion. "I didn't want you to find out this way, but you deserve to know the truth." David's chest tightened. This was it. The moment he had been waiting for. The moment that would finally put all the pieces together. "What truth?" he asked, his voice thick with dread. Maria took a deep breath, her gaze darting around the room as if she were searching for an escape, but there was none. Rachel didn't just leave to find answers. She wasn't taken. She ran away. And David. I'm the one who helped her. David felt like the ground had been ripped from under him. His mouth went dry. You helped her? What do you mean? He stammered, unable to comprehend what she was saying. He had trusted Maria. She was the last person he expected to betray him. Maria nodded slowly, her eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and regret. I didn't want to, David. I didn't want to be a part of this, but I didn't have a choice. They made me help. I didn't even know how deep it went until it was too late. The people behind this, the ones who've been watching you, they've been watching me, too. And Rachel, she's in deeper than you know. She was never just a victim in this. She's been involved in something far more dangerous than either of us could have imagined. And I've been helping them keep you in the dark. David's mind spun. Everything he thought he knew had just been shattered. Who are they, Maria? Who are you working for? But Maria only shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. I can't say. You don't understand. If I tell you, it won't just be you who's in danger. They'll come after you, after Rachel, after everyone you care about. But I can't stand by and watch this happen. I can't be a part of it anymore. David felt a surge of anger and betrayal rise within him, but it was quickly replaced by something darker, something much more unsettling. Fear. Fear of the unknown. Fear of the people Maria was talking about. And fear that the truth, the real truth, was so much worse than he could have imagined. Before he could respond, the door slammed open, and a figure stepped into the room. David's heart stopped. It was Charlie, the bartender from the bar. But this time, he wasn't alone. Behind him stood two men in dark suits, their faces unreadable, their presence looming like a shadow over the room. Charlie smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who knew something that David didn't. I see you've met Maria, Charlie said, his voice low and measured. But you still don't understand, do you, David? You're not just a pawn in this game. You're the king. David's blood ran cold. What did he mean by that? Why was Charlie involved? Why had Maria been lying to him all along? And most importantly, what was it that Rachel had discovered? Something so terrible that it had made her disappear without a trace? As the men stepped closer, David realized that the answers he sought weren't just out of reach. They were hidden in plain sight. The mystery, the danger, everything that had been haunting him was about to explode in ways he couldn't even begin to fathom. And now, with no way out, he was about to learn just how deep the betrayal really went. The story, he realized, wasn't what he thought it was at all. And the truth was far darker than he could ever have imagined. David's mind was a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts, none of them clear enough to make a decision. He stood frozen in the middle of the room, unable to process what Charlie had just said. He had been running in circles for weeks, desperately trying to piece together a puzzle that now seemed even more impossible. He had trusted Maria, trusted her as someone who would stand by him, someone who might help him find Rachel, uncover the truth. But now, everything he believed was crumbling. The weight of her betrayal crushed him, and as the men in suits closed in around him, the suffocating reality of his situation became impossible to ignore. Charlie's smile twisted into something darker, as though he had been waiting for this exact moment. You still don't get it, do you, David? This isn't just about finding Rachel. It never was. It's about power. Control. And you're right in the middle of it, whether you like it or not. David clenched his fists, his heart pounding in his chest. There was a storm brewing, one that threatened to consume everything in its path. The stakes had never been higher, and the people he once thought he could trust were now part of a larger, more dangerous game. The choice before him was as clear as it was impossible. If he wanted to protect himself and everyone he cared about, he would have to walk away, forget everything, leave Rachel to whatever fate had befallen her, and turn his back on the truth. Or he could keep fighting, keep digging, knowing that it would only put him in more danger. But the idea of abandoning Rachel, of leaving her to face whatever horrors she had uncovered alone, was a fate David couldn't even entertain. He turned to Maria, his eyes desperate for any hint of remorse, any sign that there was still a way out, some possibility of redemption. She stood motionless, her face a mask of guilt and fear. "Maria," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Why didn't you tell me the truth? Why didn't you warn me? I thought you were helping me." Her eyes shifted away from his gaze, a flicker of pain crossing her face. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Instead, she closed her eyes, as if bracing for something worse. "I didn't have a choice, David," she said softly. "I didn't want you to get involved. I didn't want you to end up like the others." Her words trailed off, as though the weight of what she was admitting was too much for her to bear. David's stomach churned. The others. What did she mean by that? Who were the others? And what had happened to Rachel? His thoughts were spiraling, but the answers were still just out of reach. Charlie's voice cut through the silence, dragging David's attention back to him. "Maria's not the only one who has a past in all of this, David. You've been living a lie, but you've always had a choice. Now, it's time to make the hard one." He stepped forward, his presence like a shadow looming over David, his cold eyes fixed on him with an unsettling intensity. "You can walk away. Forget about Rachel, about everything you've learned. You can go back to your life, pretend this never happened. We'll leave you alone." David's breath caught in his throat. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing on him, suffocating him with its enormity. What was he supposed to do? Could he really walk away from this, let go of Rachel and everything he had worked so hard to uncover? Would that really be the safe option? Or would he be forced to live with the knowledge that he had abandoned the truth, abandoned the people who needed him most? But Charlie's voice, low and dangerous, pierced through his inner turmoil. "Or you can keep digging. Keep going down this rabbit hole, and you'll find things that will change your life forever. But you won't be safe. No one will be. And you'll never see the people you love again." The words hit David like a punch to the gut. He had been so focused on finding the truth that he hadn't fully understood the cost. Every step he took deeper into this nightmare seemed to carry a price that might be far too high to pay. But then his thoughts flashed to Rachel again, to the fear in her eyes when she disappeared, the pain of knowing that she was out there somewhere, hiding from something too dangerous to face alone. Before he could make a decision, the room seemed to grow colder, darker. The two men in suits stepped forward, their eyes never leaving him, as if waiting for him to speak. The tension in the air was so thick it felt suffocating. And then, just as David thought he might choke on the weight of his choices, Maria stepped forward, her voice shaky but determined. "Don't listen to them, David," she said, her eyes pleading with him. "They'll lie to you. They've been lying to you the entire time. It's not just about protecting Rachel. It's about stopping something much bigger, something that could destroy everything we know. I never wanted you to be part of this, but now you're in too deep. We can't turn back, not now." David's head swirled. What had she just said? Destroy everything we know?
What was she talking about?
He had never felt so lost in his life. Every time he thought he was getting closer to the truth, something else came along to pull him in a different direction, to cloud his judgment and keep him from seeing the full picture. But the worst part was the nagging doubt in his gut, the sickening feeling that no matter what choice he made, it wouldn't be enough. He was stuck in a web of lies, betrayals, and threats that seemed too powerful to escape. And the truth he had been so desperate to uncover, was slipping further and further from his grasp, just beyond reach. Charlie's voice interrupted his thoughts, once again bringing him back to the impossible choice before him. "You can't escape this, David. There's no way out. The question is, what's more important to you, the truth or your life?" David's heart raced as he stood there, the weight of his decision crashing down on him. He didn't know if he could survive the answer. But one thing was certain, whatever he chose, there was no going back. David's pulse hammered in his chest, a drumbeat of anxiety that was growing louder, more urgent with each passing second. He felt the walls closing in, suffocating him as the gravity of Charlie's words began to settle in. There's no way out. How had it come to this? The truth, the one thing he had chased relentlessly, thinking it was just about Rachel, about finding her, about bringing justice, was something far darker. The conspiracy, it seemed, had roots that went deeper than he could have ever imagined. This wasn't just about Rachel anymore. It was about power, manipulation, control over things far bigger than anything David had ever dreamed of. The more he dug, the more he uncovered, the more people he trusted turned out to be part of it. And now, with everything crashing down around him, the scope of what he was dealing with felt impossible to comprehend. Maria was no longer just an ally in this fight. She was a pawn, just like everyone else. Her words had been riddled with half-truths and half-baked apologies, but the reality was clear now. They'd all been lied to, manipulated by forces far beyond their control. And then there was Charlie, standing in front of him, his smirk a grim reminder that the game was rigged from the start. But it wasn't just Charlie. It wasn't just Maria either. It was everyone. From the friends David had once trusted to the strangers who had always seemed just a little too eager to help, they were all part of this shadowy world of deceit. He'd been played from the beginning, a mere pawn in a much larger game. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. He wasn't the only one being watched. This wasn't just a story about one man trying to find his missing friend. This was something far bigger, something that reached into every part of his life. Every choice he made, every action he took, had been predicted, guided by unseen hands. His every move had been anticipated, manipulated. The people he trusted? They weren't who they seemed. There were more players involved than David could ever have imagined, people in high places with resources, connections, and a reach so vast that it felt as though nothing could stop them. His phone buzzed in his pocket, but David ignored it, unable to tear his focus away from Charlie, who seemed to sense the rising tension. "You're starting to get it now, aren't you?" Charlie said with that chilling smile. "It's not just about Rachel. It's never been just about Rachel. This is about controlling everything, every person, every decision, every outcome. This is bigger than you, David. Bigger than you could ever understand." David's thoughts raced, but the room spun as he struggled to grasp what was happening. The pieces he had spent weeks piecing together, all the clues he had uncovered, now felt meaningless in the face of this new, terrifying revelation. The conspiracy was too vast, too intricate. It was everywhere, wrapped around every person he knew. How deep did it go? How many people had been bought off? How many people had been silenced? Before David could process what Charlie was saying, there was a sharp knock on the door. The men in suits, they were back. They stepped into the room, their faces unreadable, their presence oppressive. But this time, it wasn't just about intimidation. This time it was about sending a message. One of them held up a folder, thick with documents, and tossed it onto the table in front of David. The sound of the folder hitting the table was like a bomb exploding in his mind. "Take a look," the man said coldly. David hesitated, but Charlie's voice urged him on. "Go ahead. It's all there. The truth. Every piece of the puzzle you've been chasing." David's hands shook as he reached for the folder, his fingers trembling as he flipped it open. Inside were names. So many names. People he knew, people he had worked with, people he had considered allies. But alongside their names were connections, hidden deals, secret meetings, encrypted messages, and photographs of people in high places. And then, as he flipped through more pages, his heart stopped. There, in black and white, was something that shook him to his core. The last name he expected to see was his own.
But there it was.
David Hartman. His name, with a list of dates, times, and meetings, all pointing to one undeniable truth. He had been watched. Every moment of his life, every conversation he'd had been documented. He was part of this conspiracy too, whether he liked it or not. His stomach lurched as the realization sunk in. It wasn't just the people around him. It was his entire life. Every decision, every move had been influenced. His job, his relationships, his very identity had been manipulated without his knowledge. And now, the very people he trusted, people like Maria, had been feeding him lies the whole time. But worse still was the knowledge that he had been part of this plan from the start. There was no way out. Everything you thought you knew about your life. Charlie's voice broke through the fog in David's mind. It's all part of the game. You were never meant to find Rachel. You were meant to find yourself at the center of all this. You're the piece that ties it all together. David's breath hitched. What does that mean? Charlie's smile grew wider, more sinister. It means you've been part of the experiment all along, David. The question is, what are you going to do now? Will you keep playing their game? Or will you make a choice and face the consequences? David's heart raced as he realized that this wasn't just a fight for Rachel anymore. This was a fight for his own survival. It wasn't just about uncovering the truth. It was about trying to reclaim his own life from forces that had already claimed it without his consent. But even as he made that realization, his phone buzzed again, a message flashing across the screen. Rachel is closer than you think. The words burned in his mind, but as he looked up, he could feel the walls closing in on him once again. The stakes were higher than ever before, and the danger was far from over. The real question was, how far would he have to go to uncover the full truth, and would he survive the consequences? David's mind raced as he stood in the abandoned warehouse, the cold steel walls closing in around him, echoing the tension that had been building for weeks. He could hear his heart pounding in his chest, each beat louder than the last. This was it, the final confrontation, the moment that would either make or break everything he had fought for. And yet, despite all the preparation, the research, the sleepless nights, there was no plan, no strategy that could have fully prepared him for what he was about to face. He wasn't alone. Charlie stood across the room, a figure that seemed almost to blend into the shadows. But his presence was undeniable. The man who had been pulling the strings, manipulating everyone around him, was here, and David was finally going to have the answers he so desperately needed. But it wasn't just Charlie who made the air feel thick with danger. There were others, figures that David had once trusted, people who had betrayed him, who had led him into this dark maze of lies. And now, they were all here, watching, waiting for the inevitable clash that would either destroy David or force him to take a side in a battle he had never intended to be part of. David's hands were clammy, his fingers tight around the gun he had been forced to take when things had escalated too far. The weapon felt foreign in his hands, but he knew he had no choice.
Not now.
Not when he was so close to uncovering the truth. He looked at Charlie, whose eyes glinted with something dark and knowing. There was no fear in the man's posture, no sign of hesitation. For him, this was just another game, another puzzle piece to fit into a much larger, more dangerous scheme. You came this far, David, Charlie said, his voice low, almost mocking. But you should have known that some things are never meant to be solved. David's grip tightened. He couldn't let Charlie win. He couldn't let the people who had been controlling his life walk away unscathed. Everything he had discovered, all the truths, the lies, the pain, it had led to this moment. It had to end here. You think you have control, David shot back, his voice steady, though his nerves were on fire. But you're wrong. I know who you are now. I know what you've done. It's all been about power, hasn't it? You don't care about Rachel. You don't care about any of us. You just want control. And I'm done being part of your game. Charlie's lips curled into a smile, a twisted grin that sent chills down David's spine. Power? It's not about power. It's about survival. You think you've been playing chess, but you've been playing checkers, David. Every move you've made has been calculated for you. And now, here we are. You're at the end of your road. David's mind raced, trying to piece together the final pieces of the puzzle. But as he stared at Charlie, the overwhelming realization hit him like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just about Rachel. This wasn't just about a missing person or some dark conspiracy. This was about control of everything. The secrets, the lies, the manipulation, it had all been leading to one final goal. And David was the key. The room seemed to spin as David pieced together everything he had learned, everything that had been hidden from him. It wasn't the conspiracy that had been orchestrated around him. It was him. David wasn't just a victim. He was the target, the experiment, the one person who could unlock everything they wanted. And now they were here to take the final piece. He staggered back, the weight of the truth crashing down on him. Charlie's laugh echoed in the warehouse, cold and merciless. Did you really think you had it all figured out?
You've been a puppet from the start, David.
All your choices, all your decisions, they were made for you. You were never in control. You were always just a tool. And now, you're finally where you belong. But before David could react, the door to the warehouse slammed open. The sound of boots hitting the concrete floor sent a shock of adrenaline through his veins. He wasn't alone. There were more people, more figures emerging from the shadows.
Who were they?
He couldn't tell, but what he did know was that they were here for him. They had always been here for him, and now they were closing in. David's mind screamed for answers, but the truth was becoming harder and harder to process. He could hear voices, feel the walls pressing in from every side, and then, in a blur of motion, he saw her, Rachel, standing there, just out of reach. Her eyes, wide and filled with something that could have been fear or something more. But she wasn't alone. Behind her was a man, tall, shadowy, and somehow all too familiar. "No!" David shouted, rushing forward. But Rachel's face remained unreadable, and as he reached out to her, the unexpected happened. The man behind her stepped forward, his hand outstretched, and in that moment, the truth shattered everything David thought he knew. It was Michael, his brother, standing there, like he had never left, like the last decade of silence, the distance, the broken relationship, had never existed. His eyes were cold, distant, and there was a heaviness in his gaze that made David stop dead in his tracks. "Surprised, David?" Michael's voice was soft, like he was talking to a child. "Did you think you were the only one in this family who could play the game?" David froze, the world spinning around him. Michael? Michael had been part of this? The betrayal was too much to process, too much to accept. His own brother, the one person he thought he could trust, had been working against him the entire time. But the worst part was this. Michael wasn't just here for him. He was here for Rachel. And now David understood. It wasn't Rachel they wanted. It was the two of them. David's heart pounded, his mind clouded with 1,000 questions, none of which had any answers. The room, the people, the situation, it all felt like it was closing in on him. He wasn't just fighting to find the truth anymore. He was fighting to survive. But then, just as David felt his grip on reality slipping, Charlie made one last move. A gunshot rang through the air, and everything went dark. The gunshot echoed like a siren in the cavernous stillness of the warehouse, followed by a chilling silence that made time itself pause. When David's eyes fluttered open, he was lying on the cold concrete, his ears ringing, his breath shallow, and his vision swimming in and out of focus. For a moment, he didn't know if he was alive or dead. Then the pain hit, a searing pulse across his left shoulder, and with it, the weight of everything that had happened came crashing back like a tidal wave. Around him, the room was chaos. Charlie was gone, fled or taken. It didn't matter anymore. The figures in the shadows had scattered, leaving only the aftermath. Rachel knelt beside him, tears streaming down her face, whispering something he couldn't make out. But her touch was real, her presence grounding. He wasn't alone, not this time. And that, for now, was enough. The days that followed moved like molasses, slow and heavy, as the pieces of the conspiracy unraveled bit by bit. Authorities swept in, finally acting on the leads David had risked everything to expose. Investigations were launched, names were named, and the media exploded with headlines that painted the story as something almost too twisted to believe. Veteran uncovers hidden network tied to elite corruption, one read. Barroom incident sparks federal probe, said another. David watched it all from a hospital bed, one arm wrapped in gauze, his mind haunted by everything he had learned, and everything he still couldn't explain. Michael had vanished after the confrontation, leaving behind only a cryptic note that read, "You saw what they let you see. That's your reward and your punishment." Rachel stayed by his side, loyal through it all, but her silence said more than words ever could. There were things she knew, things she still hadn't shared. And David wasn't sure he wanted to hear them. Not yet. As his strength returned, so did the questions. The truth had surfaced, yes, but it felt more like the tip of an iceberg than any real conclusion. Documents had been found, encrypted files buried in offshore servers, witness statements from people who had since disappeared. Every answer only led to another door. Every revelation came wrapped in a shroud of uncertainty. But there was one thing David knew for sure. None of this had started the night he was denied service at that bar. That was just the spark that set off a chain reaction years in the making. Looking back, he could see how the pieces had been moving all along, how he'd been manipulated and tested, how his history, his military record, his family ties, his sense of loyalty had made him the perfect pawn in a much larger game. And now, even though some of the players were exposed, the game itself was far from over. He eventually returned to that same bar, not for answers, not to make a statement, but because something in him needed to face it.
The place had changed.
New management, new staff, even a new name. But as he sat in the corner booth where everything had started, a strange sense of calm settled over him. He ordered a drink, stared into the amber liquid, and let himself breathe. The past couldn't be erased, but maybe, just maybe, it could be lived with. And yet, even in that moment of stillness, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. A man in a dark coat lingered too long outside the window. A letter slid under his motel room door the next morning with no return address, just 2 words written in bold ink. Keep quiet. David folded the letter, slipped it into his jacket, and said nothing.
He knew better now.
Some truths were too dangerous to speak aloud, and some victories didn't come with parades or medals. They came with silence, with survival. Rachel eventually left town, saying she needed space, that too much had happened too fast. David didn't argue. They had been through something no one else could understand, but sometimes surviving together wasn't the same as healing together. He wished her well and let her go, knowing full well that if their paths crossed again, it would be under far different circumstances. In the end, the story didn't end with fireworks or final justice. It ended with a man walking away from the fire instead of being consumed by it. David went back to quiet places, started working with veterans again, this time helping those who were struggling in the shadows the way he had. He never spoke about what had happened in that warehouse, never told the full story to anyone. And when reporters came knocking, when producers begged for interviews and podcasts tried to sensationalize his life, he gave them nothing. Because what had happened wasn't just a mystery to solve, it was a warning. And if people were smart, they'd understand that some stories weren't meant to be finished. But sometimes on quiet nights, when the wind whispered too close to the truth, David would sit on his porch and stare at the stars, wondering how much of his life had been lived in the open and how much had been scripted behind closed doors. The conspiracy had ended, but the silence afterward felt just as dangerous. Still, he found peace, not in justice, but in endurance. He had made it through. And while some scars would never fade, they were proof that he'd fought back, that he'd mattered, that he hadn't let them win. And just when everything seemed quiet again, when life felt almost normal, a familiar envelope arrived in the mail. No return address. No name. Just a black card inside with one phrase burned into the center. You've only scratched the surface. David stared at it for a long time, the weight of it heavy in his hands.
He didn't know what it meant, not yet.
But he knew one thing for sure. This story wasn't over. Not even close.